Imagine for a moment that it is just after midnight on September 26, 1983. While most of the world is tucked away in bed, dreaming of a peaceful tomorrow, a man named Stanislav Petrov is sitting in a secret bunker south of Moscow. He is the duty officer in charge of the Soviet Union's early warning satellite system. The room is quiet, filled only with the hum of cooling fans and the soft glow of primitive computer monitors. Suddenly, the silence is shattered. A siren screams. A massive red screen at the front of the room flashes one word in Cyrillic: start. Launch. According to the Soviet Union's most advanced satellite technology, the United States has just launched an intercontinental ballistic missile. One missile, then another, then three more. In total, 5 nuclear warheads are supposedly hurtling across the atmosphere toward the Soviet heartland. In this exact moment, the fate of every human being on the planet rests on the shoulders of this one man. He has exactly 10 minutes to decide if he should pick up the phone and inform the Soviet leadership that World War III has begun. If he makes the call, the Soviet Union will launch a massive retaliatory strike, and the world as we know it will end in a firestorm of radiation and ash. If he doesn't, and the missiles are real, his country will be destroyed without a fight. This is the story of the 10 minutes that canceled World War III. To understand why this moment was so terrifyingly close to disaster, we have to look at the world in 1983. History books often paint the Cold War as a long, boring chess match, but by the early 80s, the tension was at a literal breaking point. Tensions weren't just high, they were apocalyptic. Earlier that year, President Ronald Reagan had famously branded the Soviet Union the evil empire. He had announced the Strategic Defense Initiative, or Star Wars, which the Soviets viewed as a precursor to a preemptive American strike. Even worse, just 3 weeks before Petrov walked into that bunker, the Soviet military had shot down a civilian Korean Airlines flight that had accidentally strayed into their airspace. All 269 people on board were killed, including a sitting U.S. congressman. The Americans were furious. The Soviets were paranoid. Everyone was waiting for the first spark. This was the environment Stanislav Petrov was working in. He wasn't just a technician, he was a highly trained lieutenant colonel who knew that the Soviet leadership was convinced the West was looking for any excuse to wipe them off the map. When that siren went off, Petrov's training told him to follow protocol. Protocol was simple. The computer says there is a launch, you report the launch. You don't ask questions, you don't hesitate. But Petrov sat there, frozen. His heart was hammering against his ribs. He looked at the screen, and something didn't feel right. He was staring at 5 missiles. Now, logically, if the United States was going to start a nuclear war, why would they only send 5 missiles? A first strike is meant to be overwhelming. You don't knock on the door of a superpower with 5 warheads. You blow the door off the hinges with 5,000. You want to decapitate their leadership and destroy their silos before they can even blink. 5 missiles looked like a mistake. It looked like a glitch. But here is the problem. The system he was looking at, the OCO satellite system, was supposed to be infallible. It was the pride of Soviet engineering. To suggest the system was wrong was to suggest the Soviet state was flawed. And in 1983, that was a dangerous thing to say. As the minutes ticked by, the siren kept wailing. The room was in chaos. His subordinates were looking at him, waiting for the order to confirm the strike. They were panicked. They wanted to follow the rules, but Petrov stayed silent. He later described the feeling as having a hot pan in his gut. He was supposed to be the filter between the machine and the leaders, but the machine was shouting at him that the end of the world had arrived. He had a phone in one hand and his duty manual in the other. If he called his superiors, they wouldn't double-check his work. They were already in a state of high alert. If Petrov reported a launch, they would trust the data, and they would push the button. The Soviet doctrine was launch on warning. They wouldn't wait for the missiles to actually hit and explode. They would fire back while the American missiles were still in the air. We are now 5 minutes into the countdown. The satellites are reporting that the missiles are crossing over the North Pole. In 5 more minutes, they will enter Soviet airspace. Petrov has to make a choice. He has no way of verifying this with ground-based radar. Radar can only see things on the horizon, meaning it wouldn't be able to confirm the missiles until they were only a few minutes from impact. If he waited for radar confirmation, it would be too late to retaliate. He was flying blind, relying entirely on his intuition against a billion-ruble computer system. He took a deep breath and made the most important decision in human history. He picked up the phone, called the duty officer at the Soviet Army's headquarters, and reported a system malfunction. He told them the alarm was false. He had absolutely no evidence to support this. He was guessing. He was gambling the lives of every person on Earth on a hunch that the software had a bug. After he hung up the phone, the real torture began. He had to wait. He sat in his chair, staring at the clock. If he was wrong, the first mushroom cloud would appear over the horizon in less than 5 minutes. He would be dead, his family would be dead, and he would go down in history, if anyone was left to write it, as the man who let his country be destroyed. The minutes felt like hours. He said later that he felt like he was sitting on a bed of needles. 4 minutes, 3 minutes, 2, 1, 0. He waited for the shockwave. He waited for the lights to go out. He waited for the sound of the world ending. But nothing happened. The sky over Moscow remained dark and quiet. The monitors eventually cleared. The sirens stopped. There were no missiles. It was a false alarm. It turns out, the satellites had been fooled by a rare celestial alignment. Sunlight had reflected off the top of high-altitude clouds in just the right way to mimic the heat signature of an engine blast from a Minuteman missile. The Oko system, as advanced as it was, couldn't tell the difference between the sun hitting a cloud and a nuclear weapon. Now, you might think that when the sun came up the next day, Petrov was hailed as a global hero. You might think he was given medals in a parade for saving the world. But this was the Soviet Union. By proving the system was wrong, Petrov had embarrassed the powerful men who built it. He had exposed a flaw in the shield. Instead of being rewarded, he was interrogated. He was reprimanded for not filling out his logbooks correctly during the crisis. Can you imagine that? You save humanity from extinction, and your boss yells at you because your handwriting was messy in the heat of the moment? He was never given a promotion. In fact, he was eventually pushed out of the military. He suffered a nervous breakdown and spent the rest of his life living in a small, cramped apartment in a gray industrial suburb, surviving on a tiny pension. For over a decade, the world didn't even know his name. The incident was kept a top-secret state embarrassment. It wasn't until the late 1990s, after the Soviet Union collapsed, that his story finally leaked out. When Western journalists found him, they were shocked to find a man living in poverty who had literally saved their lives. When asked why he didn't follow orders, Petrov simply said, "I was the only one in the crew who had a civilian education. All the others were professional soldiers. They were taught to give and obey orders." He believed that his ability to think outside the rigid military box was the only thing that stopped the apocalypse. It's a chilling thought to realize how much of our existence depends on the right person being in the right room at the right time. If Petrov had been sick that day, or if a more disciplined officer had been on duty, there is a very high probability that you wouldn't be here listening to this. We like to think that history is made by great leaders and massive movements, but sometimes history is made by a man who refuses to do his job. Petrov died in 2017, largely forgotten by the public, but his legacy is the very fact that we are still here to talk about him. This story is a reminder of how fragile our world truly is. We live on a planet covered in digital tripwires, and even today, the systems that govern our survival are prone to the same glitches and human errors that almost ended it all in 1983. It makes you wonder, how many other times have we come this close without even knowing it? How many other Stanislav Petrovs are out there right now, sitting in a bunker, hoping the computer is wrong? If you found this story as incredible as I did, do me a favor and hit the like button. It helps tell the algorithm that these stories of unsung heroes deserve to be heard. And if you want to dive deeper into the hidden corners of history that shaped our world, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. There are so many stories like this one. Stories of the seconds, the inches, and the decisions that changed everything. Thank you for watching. And remember, sometimes the greatest act of heroism isn't what you do, but what you choose not to do. I'll see you in the next one.